Okay, well, we are ready to get going. My name is Rob Dietz, and I'm the program director at Post Carbon Institute, and I'm really happy to be your moderator today for this special webinar. Where will our food come from? Our topic is, how can we support a food system that honors all people, takes care of nature, and provides for the health of our communities, especially as we come out of the fossil fuel age and make the transition to renewable energy. I want to welcome all our participants. Thanks for joining us and supporting our work at Post Carbon Institute. And I especially want to welcome our panelists, Gail Taylor, Jason Bradford, and Reggie Hazlitt-Marroquin. Agriculturally speaking, this is a super busy time of year, so I'm all the more grateful to each of you for taking time out and participating in this event. Before I introduce our panelists more formally, I want to lay out the format of this webinar. We have 75 minutes, which seems like a lot, but I think that's going to go by really fast. So we decided we're going to dispense with any big analysis of the problem. We're making the leap that if you're here joining us, you're aware that our industrial food system is unsustainable. It's a food system born not out of patient observation, ecology, and wisdom, but of profit-seeking, exploitation of land, water, and labor. And it's a technochemical assault on nature. I could say a lot more. Our three panelists could say a lot more, but we're here to talk about a different way of putting food on the table. So the idea is to understand how our panelists have gotten into the work they do. I find it truly inspiring, and I hope you will too. After I've introduced them, I'll ask an opening question about the path each of them took to get where they are today, and we'll have some conversation about that. And then it'll be your turn. You can type questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll field as many of those as we can. We took some questions ahead of time as well, and we'll get to some of those. I have to apologize. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them, so please forgive us if we don't get your question in, but don't let that stop you from asking what's on your mind. Okay, let me run through some short bios here. Gail Taylor is the owner-operator of 3 Part Harmony Farm, a longtime resident of the Washington, D.C. area. Gail has worked as an organizer and activist for social justice, focusing on Latin American solidarity on the international scene and affordable housing on the local scene. She's been farming organically since 2005. 3 Part Harmony Farm was born out of a community visioning process that started in 2011. And in 2015, she was featured as one of the innovative leaders transforming Metro DC's food system. She's a member of the Seed Keepers Collective, Ecohermanas, and co-founder of the Community Farming Alliance. Jason Bradford is a co-founder of Farmland LP, a farmland management fund implementing organic and mixed crop and livestock systems, where he worked until 2018. I know Jason well because he's a neighbor and the board president of Post Carbon Institute. He also sits on the Economic Development Advisory Board for Corvallis and Benton County, and he serves as an advisor for the Oregon Flora Project based at Oregon State University. He's also the author of the popular report, The Future is Rural: Food System Adaptations to the Great Simplification. And Reggie Hazlitt-Marroquin is the president and CEO of the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. He's the co-owner and co-founder of Regeneration Farms and Tree Range Chicken. He's also the author of In the Shadow of Green Man: My Journey from Poverty and Hunger to Food Security and Hope. Reggie is known for developing strategies for regenerative food systems that deliver social, economic, and ecological benefits. He's currently a board member with the Conservation Corps of Minnesota and Iowa, a founding and steering committee member of Regeneration International, and an advisory board member for the Savannah Institute. In 2018, Reggie was awarded one of the prestigious Lifetime Ashoka Fellowships for his pioneering work on regenerative poultry. Okay, thanks again to each of you, to our three guests, for taking time to be with us today and for the work you're doing. I'm going to give each of you about 6 or 7 minutes to answer the following question. And I want to start with you, Gail. And here's the question. Your work falls way outside the norm when it comes to how farming and food are produced, typically in the United States. So what in your life led you to this point in your career? In other words, how did you decide to do what it is you do?
Well, I guess it's a two-part answer for me. The first part is, how did I go from working in an office and being a social justice activist to being outside working on a farm? And then the next part, right, was how did I decide to take that experience working in rural Maryland and bring it home to the place where I've been living since 1999, which is Washington, D.C. So the first part is I got into farming as my quarter life crisis. I had, as you mentioned in my bio, I had been working on anti-militarization issues related to U.S. foreign policy in Latin America since I'd moved to D.C. And so I did a lot of going to Capitol Hill and telling other people what they should do to make the world a better place. And it just sort of started to feel like I wanted something a little bit more concrete to do. And I wanted to be able to come home every day and say, this is what I did to make the world a better place. So during that time, I quit my job and went and volunteered in Central America. And when I came back home, volunteering at an organic farm in exchange for vegetables was one of the things that I did first and foremost because I didn't have any money, right? But also as a teenager, I had become a vegetarian after seeing a lot of food-related diseases and illnesses bring people in my family to a very early death, unfortunately. I had seen just a lot of people in my family not having healthy lifestyles. And so I told my mom one day when I was 13, I was going to be a vegetarian. And she said, that's great, but I'm only going to make one dinner. So you have to decide if you're going to eat it or not. But no, later on, I did become a vegetarian in college, and I've always been super interested in figuring out how to eat well and exercise and have a more healthy lifestyle. And so the opportunity to volunteer at a farm in exchange for food was sort of part of my path in learning where my food comes from and try to become a more educated consumer. And so those two things just sort of happened at the same time. I was looking for a way that I could just be more involved in every day, how to make the world a better place. And I was looking for a way to learn about where my food comes from and how to be more involved in that. And I was offered a job and I took it, and it was sort of like a rabbit hole from there. I just went from part-time working to full-time working to then you could say graduating, I guess. It just seemed time after 5 years to stop driving 45 minutes to work at an organic farm and to bring that skill that I had learned home to my community here in Washington, D.C. And so that's the second part. I decided to start a production farm in the city.
Yeah. Thanks. I want you to follow up for a minute because I know that your development of the farm, it wasn't easy. It wasn't oh, okay, I'm going to bring this home to D.C. Here's some land that I just have that I can take and use. And we can get into this more as the conversation develops, but you actually had to jump through some serious hoops to get that land and the ability to farm in D.C., right?
Yeah, the problem is, D.C. is not a state, and we don't have a state Department of Agriculture, which, when you look at our urban farming in the country, a lot of cities are falling back on that support of extension and the State Department of Agriculture systems. And so, yeah, we didn't have that in DC. We hadn't had farms in the city in decades, and we didn't really have a precedent for the government to subsidize and support vegetable farming, which this is going to come up, right? We all know, farming is inherently an industry that needs that community and policy buy-in. We are not growing a product that commands on the marketplace the price that it costs to grow it. And so without those sort of like agricultural political support system, I was faced with looking for a lease on a private piece of property that was assessed at $5.2 million for a 2-acre parcel, unimproved, vacant lot, off the grid, which is something a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their minds around. After 7 years, I still don't have electricity at the farm. But yeah, $5.2 million would have been a $50,000 a year tax bill, which when I gave tours in the early days, I would always tell people that's a lot of cucumbers.
Yeah.
You know, obviously it wasn't feasible. It was cost prohibitive to do that. So yeah, I found myself, after having left the policy world, going back to that skill set and doing a local campaign that took 3 years to get a farm bill in DC that restructured and changed the way that taxes are assessed on vacant land in order to facilitate that people could follow my path, do what I did, and lease land either privately from landowners, or also it opens up lots that are in the city rolls to be able to have more urban farms in DC.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. I lived in DC for years, and I don't recall ever seeing a farm. And I love that's now available there.
Yeah.
And also, I just have to mention, for those of us in midlife, that you're ahead of the curve, having a quarter life crisis.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Gail. I want to turn to you, Jason. Same question. You are doing things differently from how you started out and addressing the unsustainability in our food system. So, what in your life led you to this point in your career to decide to do what you're doing?
Yeah, there really wasn't a plan. It just I sort of stumbled into this a bit, and had a little bit of maybe a third is there a third of a life crisis? Probably in my early 30s. And I was an academic, like a young post-grad, getting grants, running research projects. And that led me to really question the viability of sort of our way of life. And as a biologist, an ecologist, really into plants, I thought I want to turn that knowledge set towards looking at growing food and the food system, and do it in a way that may be able to last. And so I had been fortunate enough also, though, in my work to have traveled around the world. So I saw how people lived in different parts of the world, and how they lived with a lot less consumption, a lot less energy, how they got by with simpler tool sets, and what the traditional food systems look like, and how fast they're also changing. And they're often, you have these globalized food systems running in parallel to sort of local food systems. So you might be in Latin America and have these big banana plantations for coffee, but then also you had these incredible marketplaces where people were obviously bringing to the local market food that was grown from that area. So that was really fascinating to see sort of the peasant agriculture next to industrial agriculture for export. So I started a school farm actually in a small town. My wife and I moved. She's a physician, so I didn't have to. I was lucky enough. I had this sort of privilege to not have to worry about making money, and I could basically kind of figure out myself. And started a school farm where my kids were going to grammar school, and had to kind of do a little political work, not to the extent that Gail did. I had to do a presentation to the local school board, and got an acre at this little school and a grammar school, and fenced it and got a CSA going, and happened to be trained in this grow biointensive method of John Jevons, who actually was in that area in Willits. So I had one of these world leaders in sort of small scale agriculture that was looking at how to do a full vegetarian diet with simple tools. And it was neat because people were coming from all over the world to work there and do internships. So I apprenticed there, ran the school farm. Then I moved to Corvallis, and I thought I really was interested in how do you transition large acres and the context of we've got this big industrial food system that's covering, millions of acres of North American farmland. And I wanted to figure out a way to sort of do soil health and regenerative agriculture on large scale. So it was still very mechanized and fossil fuel dependent, but I was trying to weed in the soil in large acres of of areas, and then try to figure out how to grow organic markets. So meat and vegetables and seed crops, grains, beans, grew a lot of things, some permanent crops as well. So I've kind of seen it from those, peasant agriculture, self-sufficiency, small local CSA, all the way to selling to big companies, and really working also though in kind of regional, rebuilding regional food systems on over thousands of acres.
Yeah.
And so that's been my story, and then a lot of backyard gardening and raising sheep in my own home.
So I want to just do a quick follow-up. Gail mentioned falling in a rabbit hole. And I know when we've talked in the past, Jason, we've used kind of similar language, Alice in Wonderland. And for you, I know that looking at climate change reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, really influenced you to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not going to make the difference that needs to be made as a research biologist. But Jason's got a PhD in biology, and you thought farming is where it's at. What was that moment in the IPCC? Now, most people don't read a government report and then suddenly go, oh boy, I gotta change. What happened there?
Well, I had this research group that was looking at climate change and the impacts on ecosystems in the Andes. So I'm in Peru and Manu National Park, and we're setting up tree plots in some of the most diverse, region of the world, one of them. And I'm trying to then say, I'm going to get steeped in sort of the big picture, the envelope surrounding our research site. And so I'm reading this, and it was this bizarre thing where the assumptions in the report, IPCC report, where we're going to keep growing the industrial economy and keep having larger and larger consumer society, using more and more energy all the time. And that was all the trajectory of, that was built into every assumption that ran those, that underpin the climate change models. But then you look at the impacts of this and you go, oh, the glaciers all melt and the sea level rises and pestilence spreads and torrential rains here and then severe droughts there and mass migration and crop failures in huge regions. And then I connected the dots and said, but that's all because we are pushing this industrial economic system. So I was just like, this is not going to work. This is going to fall apart. This cannot go on. You can't do both of those. You can't, quadruple the size of the economy in 100 years while the ecosystems are collapsing around you. So I kind of had a crisis. I lost faith in our entire political leadership of the world. People assuming we were going to solve these global crises through these international agreements. And I kind of like Gail, you're fighting these, I was writing research papers and saying, this is really bad. And it would get, read by 5 people. And so you feel like you're putting all this effort into things and then you don't see something tangible. And what's really nice about farming, and this is just this morning I was doing something. I felt like, oh, I just accomplished something in the last couple hours that is real. So,
yeah.
So maybe that's about, you staying sane. But then also if you can lead by example, if it can maybe make a difference, then when more people kind of go through their crisis, they can look up and say, oh, somebody's a little ahead of the curve here and I can do that.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jason. Reggie, I want to turn to you. Your turn. Same question. Your work is very much outside the norm of this industrial, unsustainable agriculture food system that we've got. So what in your history, in your life, what's the story behind you deciding to do what you're doing now?
Well, for me, it was very straightforward. I was born, grew up in Guatemala. And, we had to move from the eastern part of the country because it never rained in there, and you couldn't grow food. It was really hard to survive. And so we went looking for water, and we ended up in the rainforest. And I was still young, 4 years old, when we moved there. And we moved pretty much with what we had on. Remember the first part of that life was, sleeping under, roofs made out of palms and things like that out in the open. And that took quite a while to get into a space where we had an actual tin roof over us. And so hunger, poverty, and all of that was just a daily reality. And when you live in those conditions, you don't worry too much about the shelter. And even in that case, we worried about it, but it wasn't the top priority. Food is always the top priority because without it, you just cease to exist. And so, but we had another thing, and we had a lot of wisdom around us. And so that I credit with the fact that I do what I do now. And is the fact that despite our desperation and our situation, we never saw nature as a place to be mined. And we knew what was going on around us. I mean, the rainforest was being chopped down left and right. Everybody was burning, slashing and burning and all of that. And even though we did that a couple of years, very quickly, it was clear that to my father and the neighbors that we work with and to the native community that we related to, that was not the way to feed ourselves and potentially get out of that extreme situation we had. So we thought our way through that. And in the process, we learned to work with nature in a way that up to now is still the most sophisticated way I have ever encountered. I mean, everything that I have watched in this country and anywhere else pales in comparison to what we achieved in that very tiny space of rainforest once we learned that we were not producers of anything, but rather we were simply managers of energy. And that the best way to manage that energy from non-edible in the air, in the soil, into edible energy that we needed was to ensure that we used what nature had already created rather than trying to impose our will on it. That, to me, is the foundation of regenerative agriculture, and that's what I dedicate my life to. Now, I did go to agriculture school, and that's another big defining point, is that I studied conventional agriculture. I became an agronomist in 1997, graduated, ready to run the largest farm you could put in front of me. I even interned at a 35,000-acre farm in the south coast of Guatemala. We had to fly out into the other parts of the farm in helicopter. That's how big it was. That was not a challenge either. We knew everything that had to be done from a conventional perspective, monoculture, what I call now the agriculture mining industry. So, but when deciding, okay, so how I'm going to spend the rest of my life, it was impossible to reconcile that kind of pillaging with my principles and where I came from. So I went back to my origins, married the technology I had learned and all of that science, biochemistry, biophysics, business management, agroforestry, dosimetry, silviculture, everything that we were taught, which to the credit of the school there, it still taught us a lot about integrated management rather than just the conventional system, which we learned to apply really effectively. I was one of the best salesmen of chemicals for 2 months after I graduated because one of the chemical companies was really eager to hire somebody who was trusted by the communities because they needed maximum optimal penetration of those markets. And I could deliver that. And I did for 2 months. And then I told them to keep their stuff. And I went back jobless and, went to volunteer at a school to teach students organic agriculture. So that was a really big turning point as well, because honestly, when you have a choice to do one thing that makes you a lot of money and another one that is actually pretty challenging to do, a lot of work and all of that, you don't have anything to yourself. I mean, I was still running around with a degree, but and a lot of possibility, but no money in my pocket, no house, none of that. And so I went in that direction. And one of the things that I think is critical in how I came into this is that despite all those problems that we had growing up and the challenges with not only on top of being poor and all of that and living in the rural community, also the war had started just about the time I was 7 years old. So I never really lived in a space where we could actually be fully human beings, because we were under an incredibly oppressive and bloody system, military system. And so even despite all of those challenges, you know, the food issue, the war, the violence, and which creates all kinds of other ripple effects in the, you know, psychological development, the stress levels and that kind of stuff, we always owned that. We never blamed it on anybody. We just owned that, and then also owned the fact that we had to solve it. We never expected anybody else to come and do it. Mm-hmm. So technically, that's what I do now. I saw the conventional mining, agricultural mining industry. I understand it from a scientific standpoint, but I also understand that nature is way, like, light years ahead of that. And that is the only chance we have to come out of what we have, this entanglement that has been created by this I don't even know what to call it. I can only call it, you know, mining colonized mentality of looking at nature in its beautiful way that it has evolved over millions of years to deliver us incredible benefits. And so at this point, I own the fact that I also have to engage in solutions, and that's what I'm here. That's what I'm doing. And very different circumstances, still same problem. There's people who are going hungry, no need for it. And the colleges that are being destroyed in the name of feeding the world, no need for that either.
Yeah. Thanks, Reggie. I just want to emphasize for everybody, I know it's really important to you, Reggie, that we think of farming, as you said it so eloquently, management of energy. You are, you know, from the inedible to the edible, not some command and control system. I want to also take a real brief second to remind our participants that you can ask questions. We'll start getting into our participant questions here in a little bit, but I just want to quickly follow up with a theme that came from all three of you, your opening there, and that is around the idea of courage and risk. Something that strikes me about each of you and why I feel glad to be here with you is, you know, there's sort of an easy way in our society of take the financially secure route, take the reputationally secure, is that a phrase, route, you know, like it's probably easier in some sense to be hobnobbing in the offices and in the halls of government, Gail, with, you know, with the policy leaders, and, you know, you get to go to big fancy dinners, or Jason, to be, you know, on your university campus, you know, directing research projects and getting to whip around the world, doing original botany studies, or Reggie to have gotten into the industry that after having learned through business and through the agronomy schools. All of these things would have been the simpler path. And I don't, you know, I'm sure none of you is going to come forth and go, oh, yes, let me tell you how courageous I am. But I wonder if you can speak to sort of the guts that it takes to decide to do something different.
I'll go first since I was last. Last will be first. So I don't think of it as courage or anything like that. I'm a risk taker, of course, but that's called entrepreneurship. To me, I just saw this humongous opportunity to live a life with integrity and honor. And to me, that's worth any millions, any billions, any money will never buy you integrity and honor. And not only that, but I live a very healthy life. I'm a very healthy individual. I have all the food I need now. That's why I wrote the book, from food, from poverty and hunger to, food security and hope. Because not only did we solve that, but now I actually see very clearly that how we can bring hope to everybody else who is in the same conditions that we were. I don't think of that as a courageous act. I just think as a very entrepreneurial opportunity to take advantage of an opportunity there that is pretty colossal. And I don't think the conventional entrepreneurs are interested in it either. So the field is pretty good. I would say that's what drives me at this point. And it's mostly that quality of life, really. The pursuit of happiness really doesn't happen because you make money. That doesn't end you there. It ends you there if you live a life with integrity. So.
Yeah, thanks. Gail, Jason?
I never really thought about it as being courageous. I feel like one of the things that I'm always coming back to is that the reason why I wake up every day and do what I do is actually from a purely selfish standpoint. I started out just wanting to be able to figure out how I could have better food choices. The supermarket is not giving us that. And as you see market consolidation, you're looking at the shelves and you're like, oh, I can buy this product from this multinational corporation or another product from another multinational corporation. And that just felt like the opposite direction of food security to me. So I started out just trying to figure out how I could feed myself good food. And then the idea behind starting 3-Part Harmony Farm was to figure out how I could spread that out in concentric circles around me to my household, my neighbors, and my community. I think also, and this is true, I don't know, maybe for the other panelists, but for me personally, just daunting questions of how do we make structural changes were part of, that was so overwhelming to me. It was part of why I got out of the policy work. I really didn't have the stomach for that. And the thing about farming is that, like Jason was saying, like I can come home at the end of the day and say, I weeded 200 row feet, which is like, okay, so there are still hungry people in the world. But that's sort of where I am. That's something that I can do. And I felt like that's where my contribution was. I think there are a lot of courageous and brave people out there who every day do tackle these huge issues. And I'm really, admire those kinds of people. I really just wanted to be able to come home at the end of the day and say, I feed people. People send me the pictures of their babies, that are born after 9 months of eating the vegetables from my farm. That is like a great joy for me. But I'm not bringing world peace, anytime soon. That's okay. I'm having an impact in my community.
Yeah, thanks.
There was a little bit of I'm letting go of something that I had a tract I was on, this academic tract, and a set of expectations about that, whether it might be my family, colleagues. And so, in some ways that was hard to just say, I'm not doing that anymore. But I have a lot of the same responses about the joy of doing it and the opportunity, and that see something that you've grown, either get to eat yourself or deliver to somebody is really cool. And so part of, I guess, sometimes what takes some courage is when you're a critic a bit of the current system, and you are speaking up, and maybe your view's a little unpopular, or you're at least calling out assumptions. So sometimes I'm on committees where they're gung ho about something, and I'll say, that tends to lead to greater emissions of carbon dioxide, and I'm not sure that's not the best thing we should be doing right now because of that. That's just an example. I'll often do that. I'll often just sort of throw a wrench in maybe the consensus trance that's there. And I'm trying not to be mean about it, but I'm just trying to connect dots. about things like that. And a lot of it's related to like city policy or county policies. So that, I don't know. I've gotten used to though doing that, and people kind of like looking around like, oh, you know.
Yeah.
It helps to have you to talk to about it, Robin. Vent.
Yeah, no, you got to vent. Actually, Jason, you're foreshadowing where I want to go with the next question. This one's from one of our participants, and it has to do exactly with what you're talking about, communication. The three of you are all communicators, written word, spoken word, delivering talks, presentations. So from one of our participants ahead of the webinar, they said, I'm in a very small community of conventional farmers and ranchers. Fresh veggies and meat are scarce. Produce at the general store is almost rotten when it arrives. So people rarely buy and eat fresh food. We are starting a market garden focusing on soil fertility and nutrient-dense food. Glad to hear that. So the question they have is, how do we communicate the value of fresh, nutrient-dense vegetables and organic practices without insulting the way the people around us farm? They want to support a community in need with respect and grace. So do you have thoughts on how to communicate in a way that does that?
I would say there's no need to confront anybody. There's no need to diminish anybody. And just do what you need to do. Take care of your family and yourself. That's the most important thing we have. And then share it. Share it as much as other people would be willing to accept your food. And I still have to encounter a situation where somebody who accepts to share a meal with you, no matter how difficult the conversations could be or how opposite ends they may come, where friendships still, the friendships won't develop. Meals, food, sharing it, good quality, nutrient-dense food, we crave it. No matter whether you're a conventional farmer or how you feed yourself, our ecosystem, our biota, and our brain systems are still wired within the biota, in the microbiota in our gut and our brain are still wired to crave nutrient-dense foods. And that it's a universal equalizer in a way of conversations and being able to talk about things. So I'll say I would never shy away. I mean, if I told you my stories, I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. And I should have a problem with everybody around me right now. And I'm surrounded by GMO corn and soybeans and all of that. Yet, every time we have a potluck and a bonfire in the backyard, with my big garden in the front and all of that, cooking our own free-range chicken and all of that, all of those neighbors come and share a meal with us. We don't have to agree on the other stuff. That makes us good friends. And so I don't think there is a place in the world where that cannot be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks.
I think he's good. I think it's a great question, and I guess having a lot of compassion and empathy for where people are at is important. It's hard not to be frustrated, and if you read the news reports about the monarch butterflies going extinct and soil's eroding, and you look around you and you think, these are my neighbors and they're doing this. You know, I don't have much hair to tear out anymore, but that's what you might want to do. So to be able to hold that, and then also be able to just have compassion and empathy for the system that they're part of and locked into in some ways is tough. But being able to have that attitude of that people will accept you and start thinking about a different way if you show it to them, and it's probably going to take some time, and some people are going to get it quicker and be more interested in it than others, and just, meeting people where they're at the moment.
Yeah.
But, I think it's outstanding. This person that wrote in is going to do that. We need a lot more like that going on. That's great.
Yeah, thanks.
This is not my area of expertise or anything, but in DC, we have quite a few organizations that are focused on curriculum and gardening with young people. And I have heard several farmers comment about how positive it is to have a CSA pickup at a school that also has a school garden. Or there are other models of this where I went to a school here in DC in the springtime that had a farmer's market every week, I think it was. And so they bring in, produce and yogurt and things from another farm, and all of the parents and the kids have an opportunity to sort of engage that way. And the farmer's market is next to the school garden. And I think this sounds like a little bit maybe devious, but the idea of sort of changing the way that our next generation of consumers thinks is, I think, a really actually an important thing to think about, because the rest of us had that happen. Well, past generations already had that happen, right? There was a time when we didn't eat everything out of a box. And at some point, the madmen made us think that we should rather eat something out of a box. And now we're going backwards, and the kids are learning that carrots come from the soil. And so I think that that's actually a really important part of what we all do.
Yeah.
Even though I don't have time to do it, but I'm glad that there are people who are doing it.
Yeah, I just have to add too that it tastes so much better too. I mean, that's where I don't think it's devious at all when that's your choice. That's a great point. Okay, I have another question here about for each of the three of you. What was really hard along the way? Like what can you think of a big obstacle that you had to overcome as you're trying to build a regenerative food system? And Gail, I don't know if this is what you want to talk about, but I at least want you to give a little bit of time to having to change the law and what kind of difficulty that represented for you and how you did that.
Sure. Yeah. We just had our first woofer stay with us at the farm this spring, and she lived with me for 3 months. And in her last week, she asked me, what is the hardest thing about owning a farm? And my knee-jerk reaction was to complain about the part that I hate to do and leave till the last minute, which is like the bookkeeping is really stressful. And I often say, if I only had to grow vegetables, my life would be so easy. And that part is really hard. But then after I slept on it and I thought about it, I think like actually the hardest thing about what I do, and maybe what we all do, is the fact that we are trying to do a thing that actually is impossible given the structure and the system in which we work. There is just no way that I can create a budget and a spreadsheet to grow vegetables without chemicals in a city and have that be financially feasible in this day and age without some big change. And I wake up every day and I do it anyway. And so I just think, I don't know what the answer is. I think that it's incredibly difficult at every step of the way. The farm that I own exists because there was something wrong. I needed a new law. I made it. Every single thing that we have fought tooth and nail for. And that just is on top of the fact that farming is physically grueling is really hard. I think I took your question somewhere in there because
I think but I would just say that perseverance and hard work is what I'm hearing from you as some key traits to just being able to stick with it and get through the problems that you're going to encounter along the way. I guess obviously no substitute for hard work.
Reggie said this yesterday, right, when we were doing the sound check. You can't do this if you are allergic to hard work.
But then what is let's turn that to Reggie. This is a little bit of a segue because you actually have a philosophy of, it's hard work, but act like you're allergic to hard work, right?
What happens is that it makes us smart about how we work. I mean, I hoed for 2 hours this morning and cleaned up about 1/8 of an acre where we have really, vegetables that can't compete with the weeds. That's necessary. And I want to just disturb the top inch or two so that I don't create more weeds. So at this point, we're on the second stage of that, and we do a lot of that hard work early now in the spring. I mean, the weeds are very thin right now, and the place is looking really good, it's mulched, all of that, right? So yeah, there's that work. As far as the poultry systems that we developed are concerned, we seek for the animals to do the work as much of it as possible. And then we engineered for that. So whether you're going to feed the animals, if you're going to do that, then let's take it all the way till you have to do the work, some of the work. So water, for example, we don't want to be hauling water. It's very difficult to haul water. Liquid is a very hard thing to move around. So let's make that automated. There's no reason why you shouldn't. Same with feed, if we can. The cost of handling small amounts of feed, for example, is much higher than having bulk bins and things like that. But in terms of the issue of obstacles, I honestly think that the biggest obstacle we have come up with, even though we have challenges in finances and land access and things like that, those challenges, those pale compared to the obstacle that the culture represents. And by that, I mean a culture of consumerism, which in the food system shouldn't exist, because it's not, when we think that way, we are just filling ourselves, not nourishing ourselves. And that's how we fall into this whole system that we have been supporting. The whole culture of individualism. This is not something, food is not an individual thing. You can't feed yourself. You can feed, communities can feed themselves. And even though you may be able to feed some of the foods that you need yourself, at the end, you never get everything that you need unless you work on it as a community. So that culture of individualism really gets in the way of us moving into these large-scale solutions, together with the culture of consumerism, which interferes with the real cost of food and things like that. The last thing I'd say is the biggest obstacle is this mental illness that we call greed. Greed really gets in the way of solution-driven initiatives. Even right now, we are pushed to prove how does your system make money. That is the first thing anybody asks. And it does make money. I can prove you it makes money, but why is it that is the only thing, is the first thing that we get asked? And if for any reason I can't answer that satisfactorily, people walk away. Why? Because we are sick, mentally sick. And we have to solve that. I mean, I got mental illness myself. I mean, I grew up in the war. I had PTSD. I had all of these things. And, we have been able to deal with that through nature, good food, exercise, and discipline. We can fix a lot of these things, but this culture that we have to deal with, push up against, is really what is at the top of this, multiple levels of obstacles that we are facing today in terms of building permanent, large-scale, real solutions.
Yeah, thanks. Jason?
That was really excellent. I think I'll build off of that, what was just said, because if you've got all this energy we've got now, if you understand like that, a gallon of oil is like 500 hours of human labor. So if what we're doing is a smaller scale regenerative agriculture is a lot more manual labor is involved and hands-on intensive management, it's very hard to compete on a price point with big tractors doing big rows and mechanically taking care of everything, which isn't practical in like cities either, right? So what we're doing now is, like we're saying, the system is not set up to give this type of farming the scale of financial rewards, the type of financial rewards. And yet our culture doesn't understand that we need people getting ready and trialing systems and learning the skill sets to help us deal with a future where we're not going to have really cheap gasoline and electricity anytime we want it. And so that's where I think it's like we're ahead of the curve here thinking about this and working on this. But it's not fully valued by all of our society and our culture, because they're all focused on the money and they don't understand the crisis of energy that is ahead of us, I believe. And what's important also from the work perspective is like one of the hardest things for me was, I can work on a spreadsheet, okay, like Gail was talking about, and I would spend the winter making these beautiful spreadsheets. But then you get out there, and if you're a novice farmer, you're screwing up all the time, and your schedule's getting off, and the weeds are getting ahead of you, and there's a soil problem you didn't understand, and you have a bumper harvest over here, and something is lousy over there, and you don't actually know why, and you're getting tired, and then you get hurt, and a lot of it's because you're like a baby out there. You're like a toddler walking around because you grew up in a culture that didn't teach you this stuff. You were better at video games at 10 years old than you were at knowing how to hoe a row or transplant something. And so that was hard for me to suddenly be Mr. Humble, like, oh my God, I'm so horrible at this. But the persevering through it and then accepting that you're on a learning curve here. And I think a lot of people will find ways to be more labor efficient, like Reggie's talking about, through the agony. And but we need to give ourselves breathing room. If there's a way that we can have a more of a community support, it gives us the breathing room to fail and learn and adapt. Because that's what's tough about this is you get like one spring a year, and it's not like other things where I can practice my tennis serve 100 times in an hour and get better at it. But the spring farming rush only happens once a year. And that's my one practice. And I'm hoping to be good at it eventually before I die.
Well, if you would let me, Rob, just add one quick thing is that probably at this point, from a practical perspective, the cost of what we produce isn't really the biggest obstacle for us. The reason that is an issue is because the industrial system doesn't pay for the real cost of what it produces. And so we are competing against the system that uses our own income taxes and all of that to prop it up. And so you have this illusion that there is such thing as cheap food out there. Well, it ain't cheap. It isn't. And yet we have to pay the real cost of what we produce, while this large system that we have to compete with gets away with loading us with the cost of what they produce and then call it cheap. And so this is really the biggest obstacle that I see, 480 plus, $1 billion going through our taxpayers' money to prop up that system. Cheap labor in excess of 20 million people exploited, living in extreme poverty to be able for those companies to make more money. And not only that, mass amounts of river, oceans, and land being degenerated, and all of those bills are being passed on to future generations, to our current generation, and we still call that making money. And then we are being asked, how do you make money? Like, show me first, how do you make money over there? Now, if you give us the same subsidies, not only will we be making more money, but we'll feed the world and we'll restore the planet. That's the competitive advantage we got, but it doesn't show. And the barrier of understanding that as a culture won't come to life until we eliminate these propping systems that allows us to create this illusion that such thing exists as cheap food.
So this leads directly to a question from one of our participants, which is, can the three of you give some practical advice to folks who are entering into this regenerative ag field in getting past these financial hurdles, in trying to deal with the unfair financial playing field? And I would even add to that to not get sucked into a worldview that's money based, rather keep to that managers of energy, keep to that ecological view that's in our value system. But when the reality is that you have to deal with money and banks. So back to the participants question, do you have some practical advice on getting past these financial hurdles?
Well, I always tell people 3 things. First of all, if you want to get into farming, don't quit your job. I have 2 part-time jobs. Also, don't do anything alone. In the same year that I started 3-Part Harmony Farm, I also started a farmer co-op with a business partner. And now I'm successfully running a multi-farm CSA to do the urban-rural collaboration that I think is really important. And then the 3rd thing I always say is stay in your lane. I think that it's just like really important for people not to look at someone else they admire and try to follow that path, but to really like in-source, like look at what you are good at and look at what brings you joy and really just go for that.
Yeah, thanks. I was kind of going to just follow each of the 3 of you after this, but I think that's probably better advice.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to think about is like, see if you can get a job at another farm maybe first before you do your own thing. That will be you'll have some money, you'll get some income, you'll screw up on someone else's farm, and you'll learn so much along the way. And like Gail was saying, she traded her labor for food or something like that. So that's one thing. Or, be like me, like I didn't have to worry about money because I married well. So I married somebody who can pay your tuition.
Well, here's something I know from being brought up in a collective effort, being raised by a village, literally. So if you want to come into farming, and I mean it to make a living, you can actually farm under our regenerative poultry systems full-time and make a living. But to be able to do that, you don't become a farmer. You become part of a system. And that's why we focused on first building a system. And a system isn't really how you run a farm. That's not a system. It's a farming practice that then you bring into a larger ecosystem that includes, building collective markets, building regional farming collectives so that you can consolidate many things that would be very expensive for you individually as a farmer. Also, consolidating technical assistance. It's very easy to support the bringing of, say, our own technicians into a region if there is a collective effort. We couldn't go and help a single farmer. It's just not economical, right? And also training. We provide, from a system perspective, you first develop systems and then you go developing farms. Then people come fully trained. Our entrepreneurs graduate fully professional at tree-range poultry and the regenerative poultry in general. And so those are the components of actually getting out from under. If you fall into the culture of individualism, you're going to struggle, you're going to suffer, you're going to work beyond what you need to, and you likely won't succeed because the minute that you get above the water, if you don't have systems and support infrastructure, anything can take you down. And so that is what I can say, as practical advice to people coming into this. Number 1, don't rush into it, especially don't leave your jobs and go and find a farm. That is the way to lose all of your savings. It's research, find us, find those resources like us around the country. There's plenty of institutions that understand this process really well. Do good business planning. And if you're going to do, regenerative farming, the easiest way, regenerative farming, again, you got to start with livestock. The livestock is central to regenerating the soil and all of that very rapidly. So you don't have those spots that you were talking about. And we don't have that. We have very uniform production. We have very predictable production. We have science and technology, biological systems, and all of that we manage. And it's consistent. We can apply that. We have applied that all the way from Colombia to Mexico, Guatemala, the Midwest. Biology can do the job anywhere on earth. It's universal. So that's what I have to say. Don't dwell too much on how you can farm, but rather what system are you going to belong to? Because that belonging is what takes care of 90% of the struggles that a lot of people are going through who think they can make it on their own.
Yeah, thank you. That leads very eloquently into next question from one of our participants, which is, how do we build communities around our food systems that are, that can be largely self-sufficient for feeding the community, but also resilient in connecting with other communities? So I think if I'm interpreting this question right, you may have your own take on it, but it's, how do we build community around the food systems that you all are working on, not just right where you are, but how do you then connect that to communities elsewhere too?
I don't see anybody else getting unmuted, so I'll go ahead. So what I call this in our theory of change and systems change and economic structuring, the vertical and the lateral dimensions. We talk about 4-dimensional land-based agriculture. The 3-dimensional aspect of it is not only the ecological, the economic, and the social, the triple bottom line, as we call it. That's 3-dimensionally by itself, but also the way we see the land. The land to us, an acre, is not a flat piece of land. An acre to us starts about 12, 15 feet underground, and it goes all the way to the tops of the tallest trees. That's a piece of land. It's a cube. It's 3-dimensional. And then the 4th dimension is the spiritual. When you think that way, then you start to see that the lateral expansion of what you're going to do, or the lateral integration, naturally brings you into other people doing something that is related to what you're doing. For example, if I am an immigrant, which I am, coming into the poultry system that we deployed, all I can afford, say, is 10 acres of land out here in rural Minnesota. And I want to join in with the poultry system. All I'm going to be able to do is grow poultry. Now, as I grow poultry, I'm going to have, the barns are going to be loaded with manure that I don't want to put in my land, because that will create an excess of nutrients and then start creating, inefficiency in the energy transformation ratio. So I need to partner laterally with somebody who can use that manure to raise crops that I may be able to use as poultry feed. But also there is somebody who's going to take that grain or whatever is growing on the farmer next door and transform it partially into sprouts for my chickens and also feed. Some of it may go to make bread and other things. So you see that starts to naturally build that community. You shouldn't just go out there and just call everybody and say, let's build a community. Do it on a logical framework that actually makes economic sense. Join with the people that agree with you and bring those who disagree, who are willing to not be in the way. And so that part is, you can continue this logic and you will see very soon you have a very large community. We're building a 20-county regional framework like that in southeastern Minnesota right now through the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance as the first large-scale prototype of our work. Now, the vertical community building is what Gail was talking about, the rural-urban connectedness. So in that case is what I was saying, build collectives, market collectives. The farmers markets are market collectives. You don't see them that way because they are not a cooperative necessarily in most places, but it is a collective effort. And so we can organize massive amounts of markets if we think vertically how to integrate ourselves with other people who are in the same boat as us, but are not going to be tilling the land. Working on the land. So I will leave it at that just to give you an idea of the blueprint and an indigenous decolonized way of thinking about community building.
Yeah, thank you. Jason?
Yeah, I'll follow up because this gets back to spreadsheets, actually. In the report, I had this I had this big spreadsheet that was like, you know, you want to figure out like, you know, what it takes to feed a particular population a full diet. And I do this spreadsheet. And what's fascinating about it is it's full of these linkages, these associations, what you might call the community. And so the land needs this rotation of like crops and livestock to be really healthy. A lot of the land does, especially the land that's prime land. The marginal land maybe should stay in forests and stay in wetlands and maybe get some grazing now and then. But the waste product of one agricultural process becomes the input of another. So that's what's important is you quickly see then you start thinking as an ecosystem that there's management involved and transfers involved in all these aspects. And having a sense of history is important too, and looking at how communities that aren't like ours, this big industrial globalized commodity system, that aren't mining communities, how they did it. So knowing some history about, you know, peasant agriculture in different parts of the world is fascinating. And, you know, the fact that the vegetable scraps and the brewer's waste and the whey from the cheese, that's what pigs ate, for example. You know, you didn't grow primary grains for pigs. You gave them the waste products. And then their manure would go out to the farms, et cetera. So there's places then, what happens is there's places for people to slot in as ecosystem managers at almost every step of transformation and capture waste and use it again. And that's I think what Reggie said is really smart. That starts to evolve on its own. And what Gail was saying is like, stick to your lane, figure out what you like to do and are passionate about, and then slot in somewhere. And don't stress out about everything. Do your part well, and other things will start happening around you, and people will start filling in. And that will feel really nice to get that associative economy really complex in a local system. But we can't plan for it really well. It just has to evolve.
Yeah, thank you. We are getting already toward the end of our time. We've got, 8 minutes left, and already a really rich tapestry of ideas and wisdom. I really appreciate it and would love to talk for longer. And there's a lot of really good questions coming in from our participants. And again, apologies for not getting to them all. But I think I want to turn to a closing question that gets to what practical advice can you give our participants and really anyone who eats food about taking the next step on their journey, you know, either to think differently or act differently? How can an individual play a meaningful role in transforming our food system from the industrial mess that we find ourselves in to a local, regenerative, healthy way of delivering food? What kind of parting thoughts would you offer on top of the wisdom that you've already given us? Don't make me pick one of you. I'll do it.
All right. I just unmuted. So here are two things I will say. There's more, but first of all, question everything. Question everything, because right now, 99.99% of what we have been fed is a lie. So from a label to a claim to everything, unless you can verify yourself, because even certifiers and verifiers already fell trapped to the conventional corporate systems, and they are already whitewashed to the great extent. I believe now close to 75% of all organic foods are now owned by Colgate and the big Target and so on, which, you know, all they want to do is make more money on the backs of the fact that we are growing more conscious and we are making different choices. Some of them are coming up with new brands and new companies so that we can't even trace where it's coming from. So question everything, and then get to the truth and make the most conscious decision you can about your food. The other thing is, you know, walk away from today and start researching the closest source, the community projects, the community gardens, the farmers close to you, any source. There's a farmer somewhere in this country close to you that wants to connect and supply you directly. And we have been seeing that, all the way from ocean farmers who didn't know that there was a market in the Boston area, just going office by office and finding out that a lot of people there wanted that source of food. So whether you are the farmer or if you're a consumer, you work in an office building, whatever, just start seeking that next step so that you can at least start crawling. And if you're going to get into farming and you want to do it for a living, then start getting in touch with us and we can walk you through some other steps.
Yeah, thanks, Reggie. Gail?
It's such a big question.
Yeah, I know. I apologize, but you all are big thinkers, so I'll put it on you.
I really just think it's important for everybody, again, just to find your own path and start small. Like Reggie said, not a bad place to start would be volunteering at a farm if you have the time and can do that. I think that is a really great way to engage with the system and learn where your food comes from. And I think people might be surprised to learn just by hanging out with some farmers, how much we talk and think about these issues and how important all of these big picture questions are to us, even if we are still nose to the ground. So if I would encourage people, if you can, get involved with a local farm or support a local sustainable ag association. I work for one here in the Chesapeake Bay region. Or also, just trust your farmer. I mean, I think that a lot of times people want like an easy, like I can buy this thing that has this label. Like Reggie was saying, we make a lot of choices every day about what seed company we buy from, what inputs we use on our farm, the way that our farms are set up that come not just with an easy answer. It's like multiple years for me, like over a decade of experience, knowing about why I do the things that I do. And I think it can be hard sometimes for people to read a book and decide that they know a better way. I think in the end, like we are changing the planet, we're making it better for you and your children. And just like having that support is really appreciated.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah. Jason?
Yeah, a lot of that was great. And I'd want to say the same thing, but a little different. I guess, one thing that I think about is figure out how to eat local seasonal food and how to be good at cooking it in ways that you like and your family likes. That's a great skill to have. And what that will do is then it will connect you to the local farmers, right? And then start asking questions and researching the history of your place and then assessing, the current people that are working on this in your area, and then assess yourself and what you can bring to it, whether it's helping with policy, whether you're a biological geek and you want to help do, restoration ecology integrated with agricultural systems, or, there's so much, what do you want to be an expert on soil health assessment? You don't have to necessarily be a farmer is what I'm getting at. Where do you want to work on economic development issues related to local agriculture? There's so many ways you can insert yourself into this and associate with this movement, whether you're growing your own food or not. I think it's nice to just grow a little something yourself, but at least be a local eater if you can, and just help in any way you can, because you're all going to come with your own skills and interests and passion, and whatever that is good.
Gosh, thanks so much. Jason Bradford, Gail Taylor, Reggie Hazlitt-Marroquin. Amazing work that you're doing. I feel really fortunate to have had this chance to be in conversation with you. For everyone who's participating in this, we're recording this and we'll make it available online. So if there was something in here that kind of struck a chord and you want to check back on it, you can, and we'll also get it out to folks who missed this. It's been really enlightening for me. I kind of got the chills thinking about what I'm supposed to go out and do next. There's so many avenues that you all pointed us down, and I really appreciate that. It's really important to act on the values we have rather than just sit here and criticize and wallow in the system as is. And you three are amazing examples of people who are taking a positive direction and making the kinds of systems that we need. So thank you very much from all of us at Post Carbon Institute, and thanks to the folks behind the scenes too who made this webinar possible.
Thanks everybody. Nice going.
Bye.